Tucson, Arizona, 3 in the morning. The air tasted like dust and diesel fuel. Marcus Dalton felt the breaching charge detonate before he heard it. One moment, the steel door stood solid in front of him, painted industrial gray, rusted at the hinges. The next, the frame exploded inward in a shower of metal fragments and superheated air. His ears rang, his vision tunneled, the hallway filled with smoke that caught the beam of his weapon light like fog rolling through headlights on a mountain road. He moved through the breach on instinct, 10 years of training compressed into muscle memory that did not require thought. Left foot forward, right foot follows, rifle up, eyes scanning, finger outside the trigger guard until target acquisition. The dance had been burned into him at Benning, refined in Kandahar, perfected in 2 years chasing ghosts through the borderlands of the American Southwest. Behind him came Morrison, then Rodriguez, then Chen. 4 operators moving like a single organism through the intestines of a warehouse that intelligence had promised would contain $8 million in fentanyl in the distribution network that fed Phoenix's epidemic. 4 operators who had conducted 47 raids in 14 months. 4 operators who were about to fail again. The first room was empty. Concrete floor, folding table, 3 chairs arranged around it like someone had just stood up and walked away. On the table sat a single playing card, the ace of spades. Dalton did not touch it. Evidence recovery could catalog it later if there was anything to recover. The second room contained boxes, cardboard, the kind you could buy at any shipping supply store. Dalton's heart rate spiked. His breath came faster behind the balaclava that covered everything but his eyes. This was it. This had to be it. Morrison moved to the nearest box and sliced it open with a knife that appeared in his hand like magic. Baby formula. Dalton's stomach dropped. He knew before Morrison opened the second box, the third, the fourth, all formula, legitimate product, the kind of decoy that drug traffickers had been using since before Dalton was born, the kind that made you look like an idiot when the lawyer showed up and asked why DEA had just destroyed a legal warehouse owned by a legal company with legal paperwork. The third room held the message. Dalton saw it the moment his weapon light swept across the far wall. 3 words spray painted in red, dripping slightly, still wet enough that the paint glistened under the LED beam. Late again. Something cold settled into Dalton's chest. Not fear exactly, not anger, something worse. The slow creeping knowledge that he was being played by someone who understood him better than he understood himself. Someone who knew that Dalton would get the intelligence report at 1800 hours yesterday. Someone who knew Dalton would plan the raid for 8 hours. Someone who knew Dalton would hit the target at 0300, because that was what Dalton always did. Darkness, speed, overwhelming force. And someone who had been gone for at least 6 hours before Dalton ever breached that door. He stood there, weapon lowered, staring at those 3 words while the rest of his team cleared the remaining rooms and found nothing. While Rodriguez called it in and Chen started photographing the scene, and Morrison just stood there with that look on his face that said he was thinking the same thing Dalton was thinking, but was professional enough not to say it out loud. 47 raids, 47 failures. $8 million in fentanyl destroyed over 14 months, yes. 217 arrests, yes. But Rafael Vega, the man they called El Fantasma, the ghost who killed 70,000 Americans every year, with poison pressed into pills and powder, remained as untouchable as smoke. Dalton walked out of the warehouse into air that still tasted like dust. Dawn was coming. The sky over the Tucson mountains had started to lighten from black to deep purple to the kind of blue that Arizona mornings owned. He stripped off his balaclava, unclipped his helmet, let the cool air hit his face. His hands were shaking. He made fists to stop the shaking. It did not work. His hands had been shaking after operations for 6 months now. Ever since the doctors cleared him for duty after the last raid, the one where Morrison took shrapnel to the shoulder and Chen got a concussion from the blast wave, and Dalton himself spent 3 days in the hospital with a ruptured eardrum. That raid had also been based on solid intelligence. That raid had also hit an empty building with a message spray painted on the wall. That message had been simpler, just 2 words. Too slow. Dalton looked down at his right hand, at the knuckles. They were bleeding. He must have punched something inside the warehouse and not noticed. The pain came now, distant and cold. He watched blood drip onto the asphalt and remembered another time, another place, another hand covered in blood that was not his own. The memory arrived without warnings, the way memories did when you spent your whole life trying not to think about them. Juarez, 4 years ago, a different raid, different target, same aggressive playbook. Get the intelligence, plan the assault, hit fast and hard, and do not stop until the objective is secure. Except the intelligence had been wrong, not the address. The address had been correct. The target had been there, yes, at some point, but not when Dalton and his team kicked in the door at 0200 on a night that smelled like rain and cordite, not when they flowed through the house room by room and found not a cartel safe house, but a family home. Not when the shooting started because someone panicked and someone else returned fire, and in the chaos and the darkness, in the split-second decisions that separated living from dying, people died who should not have died. A police chief's family, wife, daughter, son, wrong place, wrong time, wrong intelligence, wrong everything. The official report called it collateral damage. The unofficial reality was that Dalton had led his team into a clusterfuck based on bad information, and people were dead because of it. Innocent people, the kind the badge was supposed to protect. The agency buried it, paid compensation to the family quietly, reassigned everyone involved, told Dalton to take a month off and come back ready to work. So he had come back, and he had been working ever since. Harder, faster, more aggressive, as if speed could somehow balance the scales, as if killing enough guilty people could erase the memory of the innocent ones. 4 years, 100 raids, 1,000 nights of not quite sleeping, and still his hands shook. Morrison appeared beside him, said nothing, just stood there the way partners did when words would not help. After a long moment, Morrison pulled out a first aid kit and wrapped Dalton's knuckles in gauze that turned red almost immediately. The sun came up. The crime scene techs arrived. The paperwork began. 47 raids, 47 failures. And somewhere out there, El Fantasma was laughing. 1,500 miles away in an office in Washington, D.C. that overlooked the Potomac River, Rebecca Marsh closed her laptop with more force than necessary. The screen wobbled. Coffee sloshed in her mug. She did not care. She had just watched the raid footage from Tucson transmitted in real time through satellite uplink and encrypted channels, and what she had watched made her want to scream. She did not scream. Deputy administrators of the Drug Enforcement Administration did not scream, particularly not women who had clawed their way to this office through 20 years of fieldwork and prosecutions and political knife fights that made cartel violence look civilized by comparison. But she wanted to. Late again. Those words on that wall meant more than just another failed raid. They meant that Rafael Vega knew their playbook, knew their timing, knew their methods, which meant he either had someone inside feeding him information or he had studied DEA tactics so thoroughly that he could predict their moves the way a chess master predicted an amateur's opening gambits. Either possibility was unacceptable. Marsh stood, paced to the window, watched the morning traffic build on the bridges that connected Virginia to the capital. She was 44 years old, widowed 3 years ago when her husband, an FBI agent, took a bullet in a raid that went sideways in Detroit. One daughter in college at Georgetown studying law, already talking about following her parents into federal service. A career built on putting bad people in prison and keeping good people safe. And right now, neither of those things was happening. 70,000 dead. That was the number the CDC reported every year now. 70,000 Americans killed by drug overdoses, most of them from fentanyl, most of that fentanyl flowing through networks that led back to Rafael Vega. 70,000 sons and daughters and mothers and fathers who would never come home because a ghost in the desert had figured out how to kill people with chemistry and logistics. Dalton was trying. She knew that. His team was good. They worked hard. They followed the playbook, but the playbook was not working. She needed something different. Someone different. Someone who understood that this was not a war you won with raids and arrests and overwhelming force. This was a war you won by being smarter than the enemy, by thinking 3 moves ahead, by having the patience to build a case brick by brick until the whole structure was solid enough to withstand lawyers and appeals and every other obstacle that stood between evidence and justice. She needed Bill Crawford. The thought made her stomach twist. 3 years ago, she had been part of the panel that forced Crawford into retirement. Not fired exactly. Federal employees with 30 years of service could not be fired easily, but encouraged to retire, pushed out, made to understand that his services were no longer required because his methods were too slow, too cautious, too old-fashioned for an agency that needed results now. Crawford had gone quietly. No media interviews, no tell-all book, just cleaned out his desk, turned in his credentials, and disappeared to a ranch in Montana where the only DEA business he dealt with was whatever he felt like remembering. And now she needed him back. Marsh pulled out her phone, stared at it for a long moment. The number was not in her contacts anymore, but she remembered it. You did not forget the phone number of a man you helped destroy. She dialed. It rang 4 times. She almost hung up. Then a voice answered, rough from sleep or cigarettes or both. This better be important. Bill, it's Rebecca Marsh. Silence. Long enough that she thought he might have hung up. Then, I don't work for you anymore. I know. I don't work for the agency anymore. I know that too. So why are you calling me at 6 in the morning? She took a breath. Because I need you to fix what I broke. Another silence, shorter this time. You didn't break anything, Rebecca. You just did what you were told. That's how the game works. The game is killing people. The game has always killed people. That's what war is. This isn't war. This is a slaughter. And I need someone who knows how to stop it. Crawford laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. You fired me for being too slow, for wanting to wait 48 hours instead of raiding immediately, for trying to build cases instead of kicking doors. And now you want me back. Yes. Why? Because the last 3 years proved you were right. The line went quiet. Marsh could hear wind in the background. Probably Crawford was standing outside his ranch house watching the sun come up over whatever mountains Montana had. Probably he was deciding whether to hang up or whether his ego was big enough to enjoy hearing someone admit he had been right all along. Finally, what do you need? I need you in El Paso. I need you to teach someone how to think instead of how to shoot. Who? Marcus Dalton, special agent in charge of the Border Strike Force. Good operator, smart, dedicated, and completely ineffective because he's using the same playbook that got 6 agents killed 3 years ago. Crawford was quiet for a moment, then, the raid I told you not to authorize. Yes. The one where I said, wait 48 hours because the intelligence was questionable. Yes. The one where you and the director overruled me and sent them in anyway. Yes. Her voice was barely a whisper now. And now you want me to train the new generation not to make the same mistakes. I'm asking you to save lives, Bill. That's all I've ever wanted to do. More silence. Wind, the distant sound of something that might have been cattle. Then, I'll be there in 48 hours, but I'm doing this my way. No interference, no oversight, no politicians telling me to hurry up because the optics are bad. You give me carte blanche or I stay in Montana. Done. And Rebecca? Yes? You're going to owe me for this. Not money. Something else. We'll figure out what when this is over. He hung up before she could respond. Marsh set the phone down, walked back to the window, watched the sun climb higher over the Potomac, and wondered if she had just saved the agency or destroyed what was left of her career. Probably both. Bill Crawford arrived in El Paso 46 hours later on a commercial flight that landed at 1700 hours on a Tuesday afternoon that felt like standing inside an oven. He was 58 years old, lean as a fence post, gray at the temples, with eyes the color of ice melt. He wore jeans and a button-down shirt and boots that had seen better days. He carried one bag, no badges, no credentials, no gun that anyone could see. He looked like a rancher coming to town for supplies. Marcus Dalton met him at the airport because Marsh had insisted. Dalton did not want to meet him. Dalton wanted to be planning the next raid, analyzing the next intelligence report, doing anything productive instead of babysitting a retiree who probably spent most of his time complaining about how the young generation did not know what real police work looked like. But Marsh had been clear. Meet Crawford. Listen to Crawford. Learn from Crawford. So here Dalton stood in the arrivals terminal holding a sign with Crawford's name on it, like some kind of chauffeur. Crawford walked past him twice before Dalton realized who he was looking at. No limp, no hesitation, just a man who moved like he knew exactly where he was going and did not particularly care who noticed. Dalton caught up to him at baggage claim. Mr. Crawford? Crawford turned, looked him up and down. You Dalton? Yes, sir. Don't call me sir. I work for a living. It was an old military joke. Dalton did not laugh. Crawford did not seem to expect him to. Let's get out of here. I hate airports. They walked to the parking lot in silence. Dalton's government SUV was parked in short-term loading. Crawford threw his bag in the back seat and climbed into the passenger side without waiting for an invitation. Dalton got behind the wheel and started the engine. The air conditioning blasted hot air for 30 seconds before cooling down. How was your flight? Small talk? Polite? The kind of thing you said to people you did not know. Long? Crawford stared out the window at the desert landscape rolling past. You're the guy who's been chasing El Fantasma for 14 months. Yes. And you haven't caught him yet. It was not a question, but Dalton answered anyway. No. Why not? Because he's smart. Because he has good security. Because every time we get close, he disappears. Or because you're predictable. Crawford turned to look at him. Those ice-melt eyes were cold and assessing. How many raids have you conducted? 47? How many resulted in arrests? All of them. 217 total. How many resulted in you catching Rafael Vega? Dalton's hands tightened on the steering wheel. None. So 47 raids, 47 failures. We've seized $8 million in product. We've disrupted his distribution network. We've saved lives. Have you? Crawford's voice was flat. How many Americans died of fentanyl overdoses last month? Dalton did not answer because he knew the number and Crawford obviously knew it too. 5,800. Same as the month before. Same as the month before that. So no, Agent Dalton, you haven't saved lives. You've been playing whack-a-mole while the enemy builds a better mousetrap. Dalton felt heat rising in his chest. You think you can do better? I think I can do it differently. There's a difference. Different how? Crawford smiled. It was not a friendly smile. Drive me to your office. I'll show you. The El Paso DEA field office occupied the third floor of a federal building that looked like every other federal building in America. Concrete, glass, security checkpoints that slowed everything down. Dalton's team worked out of a bullpen arrangement with desks facing each other in clusters and whiteboards covering every available wall surface. When Dalton walked in with Crawford, the room went quiet. Morrison looked up from his computer. Chen stopped mid-sentence in whatever conversation she was having with Rodriguez. Reyes, the Border Patrol analyst who had been embedded with the task force for 6 months, stood and walked over. This is Bill Crawford, Dalton said without preamble. He's here to consult on the Fantasma case. Nobody said anything. Crawford walked to the nearest whiteboard. It was covered with photographs, names, connecting lines drawn in dry erase marker, the standard conspiracy board that every investigation built. Crawford studied it for maybe 30 seconds. Then he turned around. You're doing it wrong, Morrison bristled. Excuse me? This, Crawford gestured at the board. You're mapping arrests. You should be mapping relationships. You're tracking what you've done. You should be tracking what you're going to do. We know what we're doing, Chen said. She had 17 years in DEA and did not appreciate being lectured by someone who had not been in the field in 3 years. Crawford nodded. I'm sure you do. And I'm sure you'll keep doing it. And in another 14 months, you'll have conducted 94 raids and you still won't have caught Rafael Vega because you're not trying to catch Rafael Vega. You're trying to feel like you're doing something. The room erupted. Morrison stood up. Rodriguez started talking over Chen. Even Reyes, normally quiet and analytical, looked offended. Dalton let it go on for about 10 seconds before raising his hand for silence. Explain, he said to Crawford. Crawford picked up a marker, drew a circle in the center of a blank whiteboard. This is Vega. We agree on that, yes? He's the target. Everyone nodded. Crawford drew more circles around the first one. These are his lieutenants, distribution coordinators, financial managers, security chiefs, the people who make his operation possible. More nods. And these, Crawford drew dozens of smaller circles on the outer ring, are the foot soldiers, the couriers, the lookouts, the muscle, the people you've been arresting for 14 months. He turned around. Here's your problem. Every time you arrest one of these, he pointed at the outer ring, the network promotes someone new or hires someone else. The outer ring is infinite. You can arrest 1,000 people and it won't matter because there are always more people willing to work for a cartel that pays better than any legitimate job they could get. So what do you suggest? Dalton's voice was tight. We just give up? I suggest you stop arresting foot soldiers and start dismantling the network from the inside. I suggest you identify the people who matter, not the people who are easy to catch. The people who, if removed, would actually damage Vega's ability to operate. Reyes stepped forward. How do we identify those people? Crawford looked at her. You watch, you listen, you learn, you build a pattern of life for every single person in this network until you understand not just what they do, but why they do it and who depends on them doing it. Then you remove the right people at the right time in the right sequence so that the whole structure collapses. That takes time, Morrison said. Yes. People are dying while we watch. Crawford turned to him. His face was stone. People are dying while you raid. The question is whether you want to feel like you're doing something or whether you want to actually accomplish something. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. Finally, Dalton spoke. How much time are we talking about? For the next operation, 5 days of surveillance before we move. 5 days, Morrison laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. Fantasma could kill 50 people in 5 days. Fantasma has killed 5,000 people in the last 14 months while you've been raiding constantly. So yes, 5 days. And if you're not willing to wait 5 days, then this conversation is over and I'll go back to Montana and you can keep playing your game until you get more of your people killed. Dalton looked around the room, saw Morrison's anger, saw Chen's skepticism, saw Reyes's curiosity, saw Rodriguez looking at the floor, saw his own reflection in the window, and remembered a wall in Tucson spray-painted with words that burned. Late again, he made a decision. What's the target? Crawford walked to one of the existing boards and pointed at a photograph. Mid-level courier, name unknown, picked up on surveillance camera footage 3 times in 2 months. Nothing special, just another face in a network of hundreds. Him. We watch him for 5 days, document everywhere he goes, everyone he meets, every pattern of behavior. Then we analyze what we learn and we make a decision about whether to move or to keep watching. You want us to spend 5 days watching a nobody? Chen's voice dripped disbelief. I want you to spend 5 days learning. There's a difference. Dalton felt the weight of command settling onto his shoulders. Every person in this room was looking at him, waiting for him to make the call. He thought about 47 failures. He thought about a wall painted with mockery. He thought about hands that shook and a memory from Juarez that never went away. He thought about Rebecca Marsh's voice on the phone 2 days ago, telling him that Crawford was coming and that Dalton needed to listen. We do it Crawford's way, he said quietly. 5 days surveillance, full documentation, no raids until we analyze the data. Morrison opened his mouth to protest. Dalton cut him off with a look that had ended arguments before. That's an order. The room stayed silent. Crawford nodded once, satisfied. Then he turned and walked toward the door. Where are you going? Dalton called after him. To get some sleep. We start at 0500 tomorrow. Hope you people remember how to sit still and watch. He was gone before anyone could respond. Day 1 of surveillance was exactly as boring as everyone expected. The courier, identified through traffic camera footage as a 30-something Hispanic male driving a white Toyota Camry, left his apartment at 0700, drove to a car wash on the east side, worked an 8-hour shift washing cars, drove home. That was it. 8 hours of watching a man vacuum floor mats and squeegee windshields. Morrison called it a waste of time. Chen agreed. Rodriguez fell asleep twice in the surveillance van. Only Reyes seemed interested, taking notes on every vehicle that came through the car wash, every person the courier interacted with, every deviation from routine. Crawford said nothing, just watched. Day 2 was more of the same. Car wash, 8 hours, home. Except this time the courier stopped at a gas station on the way home and spoke briefly with a woman in medical scrubs. The conversation lasted maybe 2 minutes. They did not touch, did not exchange anything visible. Just talked and then went their separate ways. Reyes ran the woman's license plate, came back with a name and address, ran the name through databases, found that she worked as an ER nurse at Tucson Medical Center. Interesting, Crawford said. Why, Morrison asked. Could be his girlfriend. Could be nothing. Could be, Crawford agreed. Or it could be a courier meeting a supplier. She's a nurse, not a drug dealer. Nurses have access to hospital pharmacies. Fentanyl is a controlled substance used in hospitals. Do the math. Chen pulled up the nurse's records. Clean background. No arrests, no flags. 15 years at the hospital. By all accounts, a model employee. Run her financials, Crawford said. It took 2 days to get the warrants. By day 4, they had bank records showing deposits that did not match her salary. Cash deposits. $10,000 here, $15,000 there. Structured to stay under reporting requirements, but adding up to over $200,000 in the past 18 months. She's selling hospital fentanyl, Reyes said, staring at the screen. Crawford nodded. And our courier is distributing it, which means they're both part of a supply chain, which means there are other people involved. More suppliers, more distributors, a whole network. On day 5, the courier's pattern changed. Instead of going straight home after work, he drove to an industrial area near the airport. parked outside a warehouse. Waited. Over the next 2 hours, 14 different vehicles arrived. Some stayed 5 minutes, some stayed 20. All of them left carrying packages that had not been there when they arrived. That's the hub, Crawford said. That's where product moves from supplier to distribution. That's the convergence point. So we hit it, Dalton said. His pulse was starting to quicken. Finally, after 5 days of watching and waiting, finally they had something worth hitting. Not yet, Crawford said. What do you mean, not yet? We have probable cause. We have surveillance. We can get a warrant signed in an hour. And then what? You arrest 15 people? You seize whatever product is in that warehouse? You disrupt the network for maybe a week before they set up a new hub in a new location and you're back to square one. So what do you want to do? Crawford smiled. I want to hit everyone simultaneously. The courier, the nurse, the warehouse, the car wash owner, he pointed at the surveillance photos, who happens to have a Sinaloa cartel tattoo on his left forearm, in case you missed that detail. I want to hit the whole network at once so they can't warn each other, so they can't scatter. So when we analyze what we seize, we get a complete picture instead of fragments. Morrison shook his head. That's 4 simultaneous raids. We don't have the manpower. Then get it, Crawford said. Call FBI, call Border Patrol, call whoever you need to call, because if you hit one target and let the others run, you just wasted 5 days. Dalton looked at the surveillance board, at the photographs and the connecting lines in the pattern that had emerged from 5 days of watching one man wash cars. He thought about 47 failures. He thought about doing something different. Set it up, he said. 4 simultaneous raids, 0-200 tomorrow. Morrison started making calls. Chen began drafting warrant applications. Rodriguez coordinated with FBI. Reyes built the tactical briefing packages. Crawford just watched and said nothing. 0-200 came fast. 4 teams in 4 locations spread across 15 miles of Tucson metropolitan area. Dalton led the warehouse team because that was the high-value target. Morrison took the courier's apartment. Chen took the nurse's house. FBI hostage rescue team took the car wash because it was the largest facility with the most potential for resistance. The raids went like clockwork. Breaching charges, flashbangs, controlled aggression, everything Dalton had trained for and executed 100 times before. The difference was that this time, when the door came down and the team flowed through, there were actually targets inside. 18 cartel members in the warehouse, 40 million in cash stacked on pallets, 200 kilograms of pure fentanyl in vacuum-sealed bags. Enough poison to kill half the population of Arizona. All captured without a shot fired. The interrogation started at 0600. By noon, Dalton had names. The nurse was Rafael Vega's cousin. The car wash owner was his accountant. The courier was his brother-in-law. None of them had ever met Vega face-to-face. None of them knew where he lived or how to contact him directly. All of them received orders through encrypted video messages. Dalton reviewed the videos seized from their phones. 15 different messages over the past 6 months. Each one showed a figure sitting in shadow with voice digitally altered. Impossible to identify. Could be anyone. But Crawford spent 6 hours analyzing those videos frame by frame, isolating background audio, enhancing ambient sounds, building acoustic profiles. By 1800 hours, he called Dalton into the analysis room. Listen to this, Crawford said. He played 3 different videos. This one has an AC unit in the background, specific frequency, probably industrial size, the kind you find in commercial buildings. This one has traffic noise, highway traffic based on the speed and volume. This one has a rooster crowing, rural location. So these videos were recorded in 3 different locations, Phoenix, Tucson, and somewhere in Sonora based on the acoustic signatures, which means either Rafael Vega is traveling constantly between 3 locations to record messages or Crawford let the sentence hang. Dalton finished it. Or there's more than one person using the name El Fantasma. Exactly. Reyes was already pulling up maps, marking the locations, drawing lines between them. If it's 3 people, they're coordinating. Financial operations in Phoenix, tactical operations in Tucson, enforcement operations in Sonora. 3 power centers, 3 leaders, all using the same persona. Crawford nodded. That's why you can't catch him. You're hunting one man. But El Fantasma isn't one man. It's a network masquerading as a person. It's a ghost made of flesh. Dalton stared at the map, at the lines connecting 3 cities, at the pattern that had been invisible until someone took the time to look. He thought about 14 months of chasing shadows. He thought about intelligence that was always one step behind. He thought about spray-painted walls that mocked him. Late again. Maybe he had been late because he had been looking for the wrong thing. Maybe speed was not the answer. Maybe Crawford was right. Maybe this was a different kind of war. He looked at Crawford. The old man was watching him with those ice-melt eyes, waiting. "How many people do you think are pretending to be Fantasma?" Dalton asked. "Based on the pattern analysis, 3, maybe 4, all related, probably brothers or cousins, running different parts of the operation but maintaining the illusion of a single leader to keep the organization unified and to make themselves harder to target. So we need to identify all of them before we move." "Yes, that will take time." "Yes, more surveillance, more analysis, more waiting while people die." Crawford's face was stone. "More intelligence gathering while we build a case that will actually hold up in court and actually dismantle the network, instead of just cutting off one head so 2 more can grow back." Dalton was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to Morrison, who had been standing in the doorway listening. "How many people did we arrest in 14 months of aggressive raids?" Morrison checked his notes. 217. "And how many of them were significant targets? Leadership level?" Morrison hesitated. 6, maybe 7. "And the rest?" "Foot soldiers, couriers, street dealers." Dalton turned back to Crawford. "If we identify all the people using the Fantasma name and we take them simultaneously, how many leadership targets are we talking about?" "Minimum 3, maximum 12 if we map the entire command structure. 12 leadership arrests versus 200 street-level arrests. Better efficiency. Better results," Crawford corrected. "Efficiency is about doing things right. Effectiveness is about doing the right things." Dalton walked to the window, looked out at the desert stretching away toward Mexico. Somewhere out there were people who thought they were untouchable. People who had been laughing at him for 14 months. People who killed Americans by the thousands and slept soundly because they believed that speed and aggression would always lose to patience and intelligence. Maybe they were right. Or maybe it was time to prove them wrong by becoming the thing they did not expect. Patient. He turned around. "How long to identify all the Fantasmas?" Crawford shrugged. "Depends on how good they are at hiding. Could be weeks, could be months. But however long it takes, it'll be faster than another 14 months of raids that go nowhere." "And in the meantime?" "In the meantime, we watch. We learn. We build the case brick by brick until it's solid enough that when we finally move, the whole structure comes down and stays down." Morrison spoke from the doorway. "People are going to die while we watch." Crawford turned to him. "People are dying now while you raid. At least this way, when they die, it means something. It builds toward an ending. Your way just resets the clock and starts the killing over again." Nobody had an answer to that. Dalton made his decision. "We do it Crawford's way. Full network analysis. No raids until we identify all the leadership. I want every person in this office focused on pattern recognition and relationship mapping. I want surveillance on every node we've identified. I want financial analysis and signals intelligence and human sources all working toward one goal." He paused, looked around the room at his team, at people who had followed him through 47 failures and were now being asked to trust him one more time. "We're going to catch a ghost," Dalton said quietly, "but we're going to do it by being smarter than the ghost, not faster." Crawford nodded once, satisfied. "Now you're thinking like a hunter instead of a soldier." "What's the difference?" Crawford smiled. It was the first real smile Dalton had seen from him. "Soldiers follow orders. Hunters follow prey. And prey doesn't care about your orders. Prey only cares about surviving, so you survive longer." He walked to the door, stopped, turned back. "One more thing, Agent Dalton. The people you're hunting, they've been studying you for 14 months. They know how you think. They know how you move. So if you're going to beat them, you need to become someone they don't recognize. You need to become patient when they expect aggression. You need to think when they expect action. You need to become the thing they can't predict." "And what's that?" Crawford's smile widened. "A ghost that hunts ghosts." Then he was gone, leaving Dalton standing in a room full of evidence and questions, and the first real hope he had felt in 14 months. Outside the window, the desert stretched away into darkness. Somewhere out there, 3 men who called themselves El Fantasma were sleeping soundly, believing they were safe. They were wrong. The hunt had just begun, and this time the hunter had learned patience. The discovery that El Fantasma was not 1 man but 3 changed everything and nothing at the same time. Dalton stood in the analysis room at 0600 the morning after the revelation, staring at three circles drawn on the whiteboard in Crawford's precise hand. Phoenix, Tucson, Sonora, three power centers, three leaders, all hiding behind the same name, the same voice, the same digital mask. Morrison leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. He had been there when Crawford played the audio analysis. He had heard the different background sounds, the subtle variations in speech patterns that nobody had noticed until someone took the time to look. And now he was looking at Dalton with something that might have been respect or might have been doubt. "So what's the play?" Morrison asked. "We hit all three simultaneously?" Dalton did not answer immediately. His instinct screamed yes. Get warrants. Coordinate teams. Hit Phoenix, Tucson, and whatever compound they could identify in Sonora all at the same time. Fast, hard, overwhelming force. The way he had been trained, the way that had failed 47 times. Crawford walked in carrying coffee and a paper cup that steamed in the cool morning air. He looked at the whiteboard, looked at Dalton, and seemed to know exactly what Dalton was thinking. "No," Crawford said. "No what?" "No, you don't hit all three simultaneously. Not yet." Morrison straightened. "Why not? We know where they operate. We have probable cause from the arrests. We could have teams in position by tonight." Crawford sipped his coffee. "And the moment you hit the first location, the other two know. They scatter. You catch one Fantasma, maybe two if you're lucky. The third disappears and rebuilds the network from scratch in 6 months. You're back to square one, except now he knows you know about the multiple identities." "So what do you suggest?" Dalton's voice was tight. He could feel the old frustration building, the need to move, to act, to do something instead of standing around talking. "I suggest we identify all three before we touch any of them. Names, faces, locations, daily routines, security details, everything. Then we build a case so solid that when we do move, we take them all at once and the whole organization comes apart. That could take weeks. Yes, people will die while we wait." Crawford set his coffee down, walked to the whiteboard, drew a line connecting the three circles. "People are dying now. 5,800 died last month while you were raiding constantly. So the question isn't whether people will die. The question is whether their deaths will mean something. Whether this ends or whether it just pauses." The room went silent. Dalton looked at Morrison, saw the same war happening behind his eyes, the same push and pull between instinct and intellect, between what felt right and what was right. "How long?" Dalton asked finally. Crawford shrugged. "Depends on how careful they are. We already have financial data on the Phoenix cell from yesterday's arrests. That's one thread. The Tucson cell is active and we have surveillance in place. That's another. Sonora is the question mark. Could be a week. Could be a month. We don't have a month. Then we work faster, but we work smart." Dalton turned to Morrison. "Pull everyone off regular casework. Everything goes toward mapping the Fantasma network. I want financial analysis, signals intelligence, human sources, surveillance, everything pointed at one target." Morrison nodded and left to make it happen. Reyes appeared in the doorway. She looked like she had not slept. Her eyes were red-rimmed and her hands shook slightly as she held a tablet computer. "I found something," she said. Crawford gestured for her to continue. "I went back through 6 months of financial transactions from the people we arrested yesterday. The nurse, the courier, the car wash owner. They all received payments from the same shell company. Different amounts, different schedules, but same source." She brought up a spreadsheet on the tablet. Columns of numbers that meant nothing to Dalton, but everything to someone who knew how to read them. The shell company is registered in Panama, but the actual wire transfers originate from a bank in Phoenix. I pulled the signature cards. They required 2 authorizations for any transaction over $10,000. She swiped to a new screen. 2 signatures, both illegible. But next to them were printed names. Carlos Vega, Miguel Vega. Crawford smiled. It was a predator's smile. "There's our brothers. Financial records don't lie." "Can we get photos?" Dalton asked. "Already did." Reyes pulled up driver's licenses from Arizona DMV database. 2 faces. Carlos was younger, maybe 35, with a thin mustache and hard eyes. Miguel was older, early 40s, heavier set with a scar across his left eyebrow. Dalton stared at the faces. After 14 months of chasing a ghost, here were 2 of the men responsible for 70,000 deaths. Real faces, real names, real targets. "What about the third?" he asked. "Working on it. If the pattern holds, there should be a Rafael Vega somewhere. Probably the eldest brother based on cartel hierarchy structures. Sonora, Crawford said. That's where enforcement operations run from. That's where Raphael will be. Dalton felt something shifting in his chest, not quite hope, not quite confidence, something harder, something that tasted like purpose. We find Raphael, he said, then we take all three at once. Crawford picked up his coffee. Now you're thinking like a hunter. The operation that followed over the next 72 hours moved faster than anything Dalton had run in his career, but felt slower than waiting for paint to dry. Every hour brought new intelligence. Every new piece of information revealed 10 more questions. Financial analysis showed that Carlos Vega controlled accounts worth $40 million spread across 6 banks. He lived in a gated community in Scottsdale, drove a Mercedes, had a wife and 2 children who attended private school. On paper, he was a successful import-export businessman. In reality, he was the chief financial officer of an organization that killed Americans by the thousands. Miguel Vega ran tactical operations from Tucson. He lived in a compound outside the city limits, surrounded by 10 acres of desert in a security fence that would make a prison jealous. Surveillance drones showed armed guards patrolling the perimeter. The man knew he was a target and acted accordingly. Rafael Vega was harder to pin down. No driver's license in Arizona. No bank accounts in American institutions. No property records. Nothing that would let law enforcement put a face to the name. Crawford said that meant Raphael was the real operator, the one who stayed in shadows while his brothers handled the visible work. On the second day, Chen got a hit from a confidential informant in Nogales. Someone had seen a man matching Raphael's general description at a warehouse compound 20 kilometers south of the border. The informant claimed the man arrived once a week in an armored SUV with 6 bodyguards, stayed for 3 hours, left the same way he came. That's him, Crawford said when Chen brought the information to the daily briefing. That's Raphael, the muscle, the enforcement, the one who makes sure nobody steals from the organization and nobody talks to police. Can we confirm? Dalton asked. Mexican authorities could run surveillance, but the moment we ask, we risk the information leaking. Cartels have people everywhere down there. So we're stuck. No, we're patient. We confirm Carlos and Miguel first, get enough evidence for warrants. Then we coordinate with DEA Mexico City and request a joint operation. By the book, legal, clean. Dalton hated it. Hated waiting. Hated trusting foreign agencies. Hated every second that ticked past while people died and the Vega brothers slept soundly in their beds. But he had committed to Crawford's methodology. He had told his team to trust the process. So he swallowed the frustration and kept working. On the third day, Morrison pulled Dalton aside after the morning briefing. They stood in an empty conference room with the door closed and the blinds drawn. Morrison looked uncomfortable. What is it? Dalton asked. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, then, we need to slow down. Dalton felt ice form in his stomach. What? I'm saying we need to take more time. Be more careful. Don't rush into raids on Carlos and Miguel. Jake, we've been working for 3 days. Crawford said we need to move fast once we have the targets identified. I know what he said. I'm saying we need to go slower. Why? Morrison looked away, looked back. His jaw was tight. I have information that suggests rushing will get people killed. What information? I can't tell you. Dalton stepped closer. You're my second in command. You don't get to have secrets from me. What information? I can't tell you, Morrison repeated. His voice was firm, but his eyes were pleading. Just trust me. We need more time. How much more time? A week, maybe 2. 2 weeks? Dalton could feel anger building in his chest. Jake, are you dirty? Are you feeding information to the cartel? Morrison's face went white. No, God, no, I would never. Then what the hell is going on? I can't tell you, but I swear on my life, I'm trying to keep people alive. Our people. Please, Marcus, just slow down. Dalton wanted to grab him, wanted to shake answers out of him, wanted to put him under interrogation until he broke. But Morrison had been with him for 6 years. Morrison had taken shrapnel for him. Morrison had never given him reason to doubt. I'm reporting this to Marsh, Dalton said quietly. Morrison nodded. I expected that. You're suspended pending investigation. I understand. Turn in your weapon and credentials. Morrison did. Set them on the conference table between them. Then he walked out without another word. Dalton stood there holding Morrison's badge and gun, feeling like the ground had opened beneath his feet. First El Fantasma turned out to be 3 people. Now his most trusted agent was hiding something big enough to risk his career. Nothing made sense anymore. He called Marsh. She answered on the second ring. What happened? Morrison just told me we need to slow down the operation. Said rushing will get people killed. Won't explain why. I suspended him. Silence on the other end, long enough that Dalton thought the connection had dropped. Rebecca, don't suspend him. Her voice was tight. He's hiding critical information. I know. You know? Dalton felt something cold spreading through his chest. What does that mean? It means Morrison is following orders. My orders. And I need you to reinstate him and keep working. Not until you tell me what's going on. I can't. Then we have a problem. Marsh was quiet again. Dalton could hear her breathing. Could imagine her in that office in D.C., staring out the window at the Potomac, making the kind of calculation that people in her position had to make about what to reveal and what to hide. Finally, she spoke. How close are you to identifying all three Vega brothers? We have Carlos and Miguel confirmed. Rafael is probable but unconfirmed. And you're planning to raid Carlos and Miguel in the next 48 hours. That was the plan, yes. Don't. Why not? Because there's more at stake than you know. Because I need you to trust me the same way I trusted Crawford when I brought him in. Because I'm asking you to wait 72 more hours. People are dying, Rebecca. I know. But more people will die if you move too fast. Please, Marcus. 72 hours. Then I promise I'll tell you everything. Dalton closed his eyes, felt the weight of command pressing down like a physical thing. Felt 14 months of frustration and 3 days of progress. And now this, another delay. Another request for patience from people who would not explain why. 72 hours, he said, then I'm moving with or without your approval. Thank you. She hung up. Dalton stood in the empty conference room holding Morrison's gun and badge and a phone that had gone silent and felt more alone than he had in years. Crawford found him an hour later in the parking lot, sitting in his SUV with the engine off and the windows down, staring at nothing. Heard about Morrison, Crawford said. Dalton did not look at him. Marsh ordered him to sabotage the operation. She didn't order him to sabotage anything. She ordered him to slow you down. There's a difference. You knew about this. I suspected. And you didn't tell me. Crawford leaned against the SUV because it wasn't my place. And because you needed to learn the same lesson I learned 30 years ago. What lesson? That sometimes the people giving you orders know things you don't. And sometimes you have to trust them even when you don't understand why. Dalton turned to look at him. 3 years ago, you refused a direct order. You told your superiors to wait 48 hours. They overruled you and 6 agents died. So forgive me if I'm not big on trusting orders I don't understand. Crawford nodded slowly. You're right, I refused that order. And I was right to refuse it. But I was also fired for it. And for 3 years, I sat in Montana wondering if I'd done the right thing or if I was just an arrogant old man who thought he knew better than everyone else. What's your point? My point is that the difference between insubordination and heroism is whether you're right. And you don't know yet if you're right. You don't know what Marsh is hiding. You don't know why Morrison is stalling. You don't know what happens if you raid Carlos and Miguel in the next 48 hours. So what do I do? Crawford smiled. You do what every good hunter does. You keep watching. You keep learning. And when the moment comes to strike, you make damn sure you know what you're striking at. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. Crawford pushed off the SUV and started to walk away. Then he stopped and turned back. One more thing, Marcus. The raid 4 years ago. Juarez. The wrong house. Dalton went rigid. What about it? I read the after-action report. You weren't working on bad intelligence. You were working on rushed intelligence. Someone pushed you to move before the information was verified. Someone told you that speed mattered more than certainty. How do you know that? Because I read between the lines. Because I've seen it happen 100 times. Because the same thing happened to me in Colombia when I was your age, and I killed 3 civilians because I trusted orders instead of trusting my gut. Crawford walked closer. His eyes were ice melt cold. You carry that guilt like a stone around your neck. You think if you move fast enough, hit hard enough, kill enough guilty people, it'll somehow balance the scales, but it won't. The dead don't care how many raids you run. They just stay dead, and the guilt stays with you. Dalton could not speak. So here's what I'm telling you, Crawford continued. The guilt doesn't go away, ever. But you can choose whether it makes you better or makes you reckless. Whether it teaches you to think or teaches you to run. Marsh is asking you to wait. Morrison is asking you to wait. I'm asking you to wait. Not because we don't want results, but because we've all seen what happens when you don't wait. He turned and walked away, leaving Dalton sitting in his SUV with hands that shook and a memory that would not die, in 72 hours stretching ahead like a prison sentence. The break came on the second day of waiting. Reyes burst into Dalton's office at 1400 hours with a laptop and an expression that Dalton had learned meant she had found something important. She did not wait for him to ask. "The Phoenix cells," she said. "I've been monitoring their financial activity. This morning, someone accessed the bank accounts Carlos controls, withdrew $500,000 in cash from 3 different locations." "Carlos himself?" "No, the signature doesn't match. Someone else with access to his accounts. I pulled security footage from the banks." She turned the laptop around, showed Dalton a grainy image of a man in his 30s, Hispanic, wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap. Nothing distinctive. Could be anyone, except "Run facial recognition," Dalton said. "Already did. No hits in any database, but look at this." She pulled up a different image. Same man, different angle. The baseball cap had shifted enough to show a tattoo on his neck. Scorpion, the symbol of the Sinaloa cartel. "He's cartel," Dalton said. "He's more than that. I cross-referenced the tattoo with gang databases. Found 12 similar tattoos in Arizona, all connected to enforcement actions, all suspected cartel soldiers. So Carlos is pulling cash and using soldiers to do it. That means he knows something is wrong." Reyes nodded. "Or he's preparing for something. 500,000 is a lot of cash to move suddenly." "What else?" "The withdrawals happened between 0800 and noon. All 3 banks are in Central Phoenix. I pulled traffic camera footage and tracked the vehicle he used. White panel van, followed it to an industrial area near Sky Harbor Airport." She brought up a map. A red line showed the van's route from the banks to a warehouse complex. The line ended at a single building surrounded by chain-link fence. "What's in the warehouse?" Dalton asked. "According to property records, it's owned by the same shell company that pays the people we arrested 3 days ago. Cross-checking power usage and water bills suggests it's occupied but not active manufacturing. My guess is it's a stash house, somewhere to store cash or product between movements." Dalton stared at the map, felt the old instinct rising, hit the warehouse, grabbed the cash, arrest whoever was inside, fast, clean, simple. Then he thought about Crawford's words, about Marsh's request, about Morrison's warning, about what happened when you move too fast. "Put surveillance on it," he said. "I want to know who comes and goes, but no action until I clear it." Reyes looked surprised. The old Dalton would have been planning the raid already, but she nodded and left to set up the surveillance. Dalton sat alone in his office and wondered if he was learning patience or just learning to be paralyzed. The surveillance on the Phoenix warehouse ran for 18 hours. During that time, 6 vehicles arrived. 4 left carrying boxes, 2 stayed. At 0200 the next morning, Chen called Dalton at home. "We have a problem," she said. Dalton was dressed and in his car 5 minutes later. Made it to the office in 20. Chen met him in the operations center, where live surveillance feeds showed the warehouse from 3 different angles. "What happened?" he asked. Chen pointed at the center screen. At 0145, a truck arrived, big commercial semi, backed up to the loading dock. 4 men got out and started loading boxes into the trailer. "We're counting at least 30 boxes so far." "What's in the boxes?" "Unknown. But based on size and the way they're handling them, my guess is either cash or product. Nothing that heavy would be moved that carefully unless it was valuable." Dalton watched the men work. They moved with military precision. No wasted motion, no conversation. Just lifting and carrying like they had done this 1,000 times before. "Can we get a warrant?" he asked. "Not without probable cause beyond surveillance. Judge won't sign off on a hunch." "Then we follow the truck, see where it goes." Chen shook her head. "Already thought of that. Truck has commercial plates registered to a legitimate shipping company in California. If we follow it and it goes to a legal destination, we blow our surveillance for nothing. If we follow it and it crosses state lines, we need FBI involved, and that takes time we don't have." Dalton felt frustration building. "So we just watch them load whatever they're loading and do nothing? Unless you want to raid now without a warrant and risk getting the case thrown out?" "Yes." He stared at the screen. Watch boxes disappear into the semi-trailer. Watch what might be evidence or might be $40 million in cartel cash drive away while he stood there doing nothing. Crawford appeared beside him. Dalton had not heard him arrive. "Patience," Crawford said quietly. "They're moving something big." "Yes, we should stop them." "No, we should learn from them." "Learn what?" Crawford pointed at the screen. They're moving in the middle of the night. That means they know about our raids 3 days ago. They know we're close. They're protecting assets, which means they're scared, which means we're doing something right. Or it means they're preparing to disappear. Maybe, or maybe they're consolidating, pulling resources together before they make a stand. Either way, rushing in now just warns them that we're still watching. Better to let them think they're safe. Let them finish whatever they're doing. Then we track the end result. The truck is leaving in 10 minutes. Then we let it leave. But we keep watching the warehouse because people who move $40 million don't just load it once and forget about it. They come back. They check. They make mistakes. Dalton wanted to argue, wanted to give the order to move, wanted to do something instead of standing there watching. But he thought about Morrison, about Marsh, about 72 hours that felt like 72 years, about learning to be a hunter instead of a soldier. Let it go, he said finally, but I want surveillance maintained. Round the clock. Anyone who comes within 100 meters of that warehouse, I want photos, license plates, everything. Chen nodded and turned back to her monitors. Crawford touched Dalton's shoulder briefly, then left without a word. The truck drove away at 0200 carrying 30 boxes of unknown contents to an unknown destination, and Dalton felt like he was drowning in patience. The 72 hours expired at noon on the fourth day. Dalton called Marsh exactly on time. I kept my word, he said when she answered. Now keep yours. Are you somewhere private? He looked around his office, empty, door closed. Yes. What I'm about to tell you is classified. You can't share it with anyone except Crawford and the people directly involved in the operation. Understood? Understood. Marsh took a breath. 8 months ago, we inserted 2 undercover agents into the Vega organization. Deep cover, full backgrounds. They were working their way up through the network, trying to get close to Raphael. 6 months into your 14-month campaign against Fantasma, they disappeared. No contact, no emergency signals, nothing. Dalton felt ice forming in his stomach. 4 weeks ago, Marsh continued, we received a video. Raphael Vega, real face this time, no digital masking. He had both agents. They'd been tortured. He said if we came looking for them, he'd kill them and send the bodies back in pieces. Jesus Christ. Pentagon assembled an extraction team. JSOC operators, the best, but they need 72 hours to position assets and plan the operation. And they need the Vega brothers to think we're not coming, to think we're still just running random raids, to think business as usual. So you needed us to slow down. Yes, every aggressive raid you ran over the last 3 days brought us closer to Carlos and Miguel panicking, closer to them calling Raphael and telling him to execute the hostages because DEA was closing in. I needed you to be patient, not for methodology, for time. Dalton closed his eyes. You've been lying to me for 8 months. I've been protecting an operation that could save 2 agents' lives. By risking my team, by letting us run raids that had no chance of catching the real targets because you knew where the real targets were all along. No, I knew where 2 of them were. Raphael was still a mystery until 3 days ago. And yes, I used your operation as cover for the extraction planning. I'm not proud of it, but I'd do it again to get our people back. Does Crawford know? He suspects, I never confirmed. But Bill Crawford didn't become a legend by being stupid. He figured out that something bigger was happening the moment I called him out of retirement. Dalton opened his eyes, looked out the window at the desert stretching away toward Mexico. Somewhere out there were 2 agents being tortured because they had tried to infiltrate a cartel. Somewhere out there was Rebecca Marsh making impossible decisions about who to trust and what to reveal. Somewhere out there was the truth he had been chasing for 14 months. When does the extraction happen, he asked. 72 hours from now. Pentagon is positioning the team in Mexico. They'll hit Raphael's compound, grab our people, and extract across the border. But it only works if Raphael doesn't know it's coming, which means we need the Vega brothers to stay calm, to think we're still fumbling around in the dark. So we keep surveillance, keep building the case, keep acting like we're weeks away from making a move. Exactly. And after the extraction, you get everything you want. Full support for simultaneous raids on Carlos and Miguel. Warrants, backup, media blackout, whatever you need. We take them both and we hit them so hard they never recover. Dalton thought about Morrison, about why he had been told to slow things down, about orders from above that made sense only when you knew what was really happening. I need to reinstate Morrison, he said. Yes, and I need to tell him I was wrong. That would be appropriate. Dalton almost smiled. You put me through hell, Rebecca. I know, and I'm sorry, but those two agents have families. They have people who love them. They deserve a chance to come home. What are their names? I can't tell you that, not until they're safe. Then tell me this. Are they worth it? Worth 8 months of lying? Worth risking the whole operation against the Vega brothers? Marsh was quiet for a moment. Then, every agent is worth it, Marcus. Every single one. That's the promise we make when we pin on the badge. We bring each other home, no matter what it costs. Dalton understood. He had made the same promise in Juarez 4 years ago. He had broken that promise when he led his team into the wrong house. And he had been trying to keep it ever since, running faster and harder and more aggressively, as if speed could somehow make up for the failure. But speed had not brought anyone home. It had just created more failures. 72 hours, he said. Then we hit Carlos and Miguel with everything we have. 72 hours, Marsh agreed. And Marcus, thank you for trusting me. She hung up. Dalton sat in his office for a long time after that, thinking about trust, about patience, about the difference between doing something and doing the right thing. Finally, he stood, walked to the operations center, found Morrison sitting at a desk looking at nothing in particular. You're reinstated, Dalton said. Morrison looked up. Sir? Marsh told me about the hostages, about why we needed to wait. You were following orders and I suspended you for it. I was wrong. Morrison stood. You didn't know. I should have trusted you. You had no reason to. Dalton held out Morrison's badge and weapon. I had 6 years of reasons. I just forgot to count them. Morrison took his credentials back. His hands were steady, but his eyes were not. Are we going to get them back? The hostages? Pentagon says yes. Then it was worth it. They stood there in awkward silence for a moment. Then Dalton extended his hand. Morrison shook it. And something that had been broken between them felt slightly less broken. The next 72 hours crawled past like wounded animals. Surveillance continued on the Phoenix warehouse. Intelligence gathering continued on Carlos and Miguel. The team built warrants and raid plans and tactical briefings for an operation that kept getting delayed. On the second day, Reyes made another discovery. She found Dalton in the parking lot during his evening run. He was 3 miles in, covered in sweat, trying to burn off the frustration of waiting. She pulled up in her car and rolled down the window. I need to show you something, she said. 20 minutes later, cleaned up and back in the office, Dalton stood over her desk looking at financial records that made his blood run cold. The Phoenix warehouse, Reyes said. I've been tracking everyone who's accessed it over the last week. Carlos, his soldiers, various logistics people. But this morning I found something odd. She brought up security footage. A man entering the warehouse at 0600, tall, fit, moving with confidence. He looked familiar, but Dalton could not place him. That's Fernando Aguirre, Reyes said. He's listed in our database as a low-level courier. We picked him up in surveillance 2 months ago, but lost track of him. Nothing special, nothing important. So I ran his financials. He's been depositing $10,000 cash every month for the last 8 months, always under the reporting threshold, always in different banks. Classic structuring to avoid detection. Lots of cartel people do that. Yes, but Fernando has another identity. She pulled up a different set of documents. Driver's license, social security number, employment records. Meet Special Agent Fernando Martinez, DEA, deep cover for the last 10 months, assigned to infiltrate the Vega organization through the Phoenix distribution network. Dalton stared at the screen, at the two faces that were the same face, at the truth that Marsh had been hiding for 8 months. He's one of the hostages, Dalton said quietly. Was, Reyes corrected. That footage is from this morning. He's not a hostage anymore. He got out. The implications hit Dalton like a freight train. If Fernando had escaped, that meant he had current intelligence on Rafael's operation, current locations, current security, everything Pentagon needed for a successful extraction. Does Marsh know? He asked. I sent her the information 20 minutes ago. She called back and told me to brief you immediately and then forget I ever found this. Where is Fernando now? Unknown, but based on pattern analysis, he's probably trying to work his way back into the organization through the Phoenix cell, rebuilding his cover so he can get close to Miguel. Dalton felt pieces clicking into place. Miguel is holding the other hostage. That's my assessment, yes. And Fernando is trying to rescue him before the extraction team arrives. Or Fernando is trying to provide intelligence so the extraction team knows exactly where to hit. Dalton walked to the window, looked out at the night sky over El Paso. Somewhere out there was a DEA agent working alone behind enemy lines, trying to save his partner, trying to complete a mission that had already cost him 8 months of his life and probably years of therapy afterward. And Dalton had been complaining about waiting 72 hours. We protect his cover, Dalton said. No raids on Phoenix, no surveillance that could compromise him. We give him the space to work. Reyes nodded. Marsh said the same thing. Then for once, Marsh and I agree on something. He turned back to look at her. How did you figure out he was DEA? Reyes smiled. It was a sad smile. Because I've been watching the Vega network for 6 months. And Fernando doesn't move like a courier. He moves like a cop. Like someone who's been trained to clear rooms and watch his six and keep his hand near his weapon even when he's trying to blend in. I recognized it because I do the same things when I'm in civilian clothes. You're good at this, Dalton said. Thank you, sir. Stop calling me sir. Makes me feel old. She laughed, then grew serious again. Are we going to get them both back? Fernando and whoever else is still held? Pentagon says yes. Do you believe them? Dalton thought about that. Thought about promises and missions and the difference between what you hope for and what you could guarantee. I believe they'll try, he said. Finally, that's all I'm waiting. He's saying that's all anyone can do. Reyes left. Dalton stayed in the office until midnight, reading reports and building raid plans and trying not to think about Fernando working alone in Phoenix and another agent still chained somewhere in Tucson and 72 hours that kept slipping away. Crawford found him at 0100 still at his desk. Go home, Crawford said. Can't sleep anyway. Then at least stop pretending to work and admit you're just worrying. Dalton looked up. Marsh told you about the hostages. She confirmed what I already suspected. How did you know? Crawford sat down across from him. Because I've run enough operations to know when someone's holding back information. Because Marsh didn't bring me here just to teach you methodology. She brought me here to buy time. And time only matters when you're waiting for something specific. You could have told me. Would it have changed anything? Dalton thought about that. No, I still would have wanted to raid Carlos and Miguel immediately. Exactly. Some lessons you can't teach. You can only wait for people to learn them on their own. Is that what you've been doing? Waiting for me to learn? Crawford smiled. I've been teaching. You've been learning. There's a difference. What's the difference? Teaching is telling someone what to do. Learning is understanding why. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Dalton spoke. The raid in Juarez, 4 years ago, you said someone pushed me to move too fast. Who was it? Crawford's face went hard. Does it matter? Yes. Why? Because I need to know if it was my fault or if I was following orders that should never have been given. Crawford stood, walked to the window, looked out at the same desert that Dalton had been staring at for hours. It was both, he said finally. The orders were bad, rushed intelligence, a political pressure from Washington to show results. But you still chose to follow those orders instead of pushing back. You still chose speed over certainty. You still chose to kick that door. I was following my training. Your training didn't teach you to check whether you were kicking the right door. Dalton felt anger rising. So it was my fault. No, Crawford turned to face him. It was everyone's fault. The analyst who rushed the intelligence, the supervisor who approved the operation, the politician who demanded results. And yes, you for not stopping to ask if you were certain. That's how these things happen. Everyone does their part. Everyone follows orders. And innocent people die because nobody wanted to be the one who said, wait. So what was I supposed to do? You were supposed to be the one who said, wait. And if they overruled me, then you'd have done your part. You'd have raised the question. You'd have forced them to make a conscious decision instead of just going along with momentum. That's what I did 3 years ago. I said, wait. They overruled me. 6 agents died. But at least I can sleep at night knowing I tried to stop it. Dalton looked down at his hands. They were not shaking anymore. He did not know when that had stopped. I can't sleep at night, he said quietly. I know, Crawford said. That's the difference between us. I learned to live with my mistakes. You're still trying to outrun yours. How do I stop running? Crawford walked to the door, stopped, looked back. You accept that you can't fix the past. You can only try not to repeat it. And you forgive yourself for being human. That's the hardest part, but it's the only way forward. He left. Dalton sat alone in his office until dawn, thinking about forgiveness and mistakes and the difference between running and learning. The 72 hours expired at noon on the 7th day. Dalton's phone rang at exactly 12:01. Marsh. It's done, she said. Both of them? Both of them, alive, injured but stable. Fernando Martinez and Agent Sarah Chen, on a medevac helicopter heading to El Paso right now. Dalton felt something unclench in his chest that he had not realized was tight. Fernando? He provided the intelligence that made the extraction possible, stayed deep cover for 10 months, escaped captivity, infiltrated back into the Phoenix cell to locate his partner, and guided the Pentagon team to the exact location. He's a hero. What about Raphael? Dead. He resisted during the extraction. JSOC operators had no choice. Dalton absorbed that. One Fantasma down, two to go. So now we move on Carlos and Miguel, he said. Now you move on Carlos and Miguel. Full support. Whatever you need. Warrants are already drafted. Just waiting for you to set the date. Tomorrow night, 0200, simultaneous raids. You have my authorization. Dalton hung up, stood, walked to the operations center where his team was waiting. They knew something big had happened. They could see it in his face. Rafael Vega is dead, he announced. 2 undercover agents extracted safely. Agent Fernando Martinez worked deep cover for 10 months and successfully located his partner. Both of them are returning home. Phoenix and Tucson cells are now cut off from their enforcement arm in Mexico. They're vulnerable. We hit them tomorrow night. Both locations. Simultaneous entry. I want every person in this office focused on one thing, ending this. The room erupted in activity, people moving, phones ringing, computers booting up, the machinery of law enforcement grinding into gear. Crawford appeared at Dalton's elbow. You ready? The old man asked. I've been ready for 14 months. No, I mean, are you ready to be patient one more time, to execute this perfectly instead of quickly? Dalton looked at him, at ice-melt eyes that had seen everything and forgiven nothing and somehow kept going anyway. Yes, he said, I'm ready. Crawford smiled. Good, because this is where it gets hard. This is where you prove whether you learned anything or if you're still the same operator who kicked the wrong door in Juarez. I learned. Then show me. The next 30 hours were controlled chaos. Warrants finalized and signed by federal judges. Tactical teams assembled from DEA, FBI, Border Patrol, and local police. Helicopters positioned, drones launched. Intelligence updates flowing every hour as surveillance tracked Carlos and Miguel's movements. The Phoenix warehouse went quiet after Fernando's extraction. No more trucks, no more cash movements. Just an empty building that Carlos owned and probably no longer trusted. Miguel's compound in Tucson remained active. Guards on the perimeter, vehicles coming and going. Surveillance drones counted 12 armed men inside the fence at any given time. At 2300 hours, Dalton gathered the assault teams for final briefing. 60 operators packed into the conference room. Some in tactical gear already, some still in civilian clothes. All of them focused on maps and photos and the voice of their commander. This is not a typical raid, Dalton said. This is the culmination of 14 months of work. 70,000 Americans have died because of the organization these men run. Tonight we end it, not by killing everyone we see, not by destroying everything we find, but by capturing these men alive so they can stand trial, so families can get justice, so the victims' names mean something. He pointed at the map of Carlos Vega's house in Scottsdale. Phoenix team goes in at 0200 exactly. Carlos lives with his family, wife and 2 children. They are not targets. They are not threats. We extract Carlos and we leave everyone else untouched. Clear? Nods around the room. He pointed at Miguel's compound. Tucson team has a harder job. 12 armed guards, fortified perimeter. Miguel knows he's a target and he's prepared to fight. We go in with overwhelming force but minimum violence. Flashbangs and tear gas before bullets. We give them every chance to surrender before we shoot. Clear? More nods. Questions? Morrison raised his hand. What if they have more hostages we don't know about? Good question. The kind that separated operators who followed orders from operators who thought 3 moves ahead. Then we adapt, Dalton said. Intel says both hostages were extracted yesterday, but if we find evidence of others, we shift from assault to rescue. Call it in, wait for specialized teams. We don't rush, we don't guess, we think, understood? Understood. Crawford stood at the back of the room watching. He caught Dalton's eye and nodded once. Approval, recognition, the wordless communication between people who understood each other. 0200 came fast. Dalton rode in the lead helicopter toward Miguel's compound. Below him, the desert was black and featureless. No lights, no movement. Just darkness and the steady thrum of rotor blades cutting through thin air. In his ear, the radio crackled. Phoenix team in position. Tucson team in position. Air support in position. Everything synchronized, everything planned, everything ready. Dalton thought about patience. about learning, about the difference between kicking doors and knowing which doors to kick. All teams, he said into the radio, execute. The helicopters dropped fast and hard. Dalton felt his stomach rise as they descended from 1,000 feet to 50 feet in seconds. The pilot flared at the last moment. Skids touched dirt. Dalton was out and running before the helicopter fully settled. Ahead, the compound fence glowed green in his night vision. Guards were shouting, running, raising weapons. Flashbang, someone called. The grenades arced over the fence. Detonations. Light. Screaming. Breaching team cut the fence with hydraulic shears. The metal peeled back like skin. Operators poured through the gap. Dalton moved with them. Training took over. Left foot, rifle up, eyes scanning. A guard appeared, raising an AK-47. Dalton fired twice. Center mass. The guard went down. Another guard. Hands up. Surrendering. Chen zip-tied him and moved on. The house loomed ahead. Single story, adobe construction, bars on every window. The door was reinforced steel. Breacher up. The explosive charge went on the hinges. 3-second countdown. Detonation. The door fell inward. Dalton entered. Darkness inside despite the night vision. Smoke from the breaching charge made everything gray and shifting. A figure in the hallway, armed. Dalton's finger touched the trigger, then stopped. Woman, civilian clothes, hands empty. She was screaming in Spanish. On the ground, Dalton shouted. She did not understand or did not care, kept running toward him. Morrison stepped past Dalton and grabbed her. Gentle but firm, moved her aside and zip-tied her hands. Not a threat, just a scared person in a house full of violence. They cleared the first room. Empty. Second room. Empty. Third room. Locked from the inside. Miguel Vega, Dalton called in Spanish. DEA, come out with your hands up. Silence. We know you're in there. The compound is surrounded. There is no escape. Come out peacefully. More silence. Then a voice, muffled, scared. How do I know you won't kill me? Because we want you alive. You're worth more in a courtroom than in a grave. You killed my brother. Raphael resisted extraction. The operators had no choice. Don't make the same mistake. A long pause, then, I want a lawyer. You'll get one, but first you come out, hands visible. No weapons. The lock clicked. The door opened. Miguel Vega stood there in boxer shorts and a t-shirt. Hands raised, face pale. The scar across his eyebrow visible even in the darkness. Morrison moved forward, zip-tied his hands, led him outside into the growing dawn. In Dalton's ear, the radio crackled. Phoenix team, target acquired. Carlos Vega in custody, 0 casualties. Relief flooded through him. Both targets, both alive. Mission complete. They walked Miguel to the helicopter, loaded him in. Chen read him his rights in Spanish. Morrison photographed his injuries, which were none. Everything documented, everything legal, everything by the book. As the helicopter lifted off, Dalton looked down at the compound, at guards being processed, at evidence being collected, at the machinery of justice grinding forward. Crawford's voice in his ear, private channel, well done. Dalton did not respond, just watched the desert fall away beneath him and wondered if this was what winning felt like, or if he was just too tired to tell the difference. The interrogations lasted 6 hours. Carlos broke in 3. Miguel held out for 5. In the end, they both talked. The financial records Carlos provided showed accounts in 16 countries, $47 million total, names of politicians they had bribed, names of law enforcement they had corrupted, names of suppliers and distributors across 3 continents. Miguel provided tactical intelligence, locations of stash houses, routes for smuggling, schedules for deliveries, the operational blueprint of an organization that had killed 70,000 Americans. By noon, Dalton had enough evidence to prosecute 200 people. By evening, arrest warrants were being executed across Arizona and Mexico. By midnight, the Vega organization had ceased to exist in any meaningful form. Marsh called at 0100. You did it, she said. We did it, Dalton corrected. How do you feel? He thought about that. About 14 months of frustration, about 47 failures, about a wall in Juarez and a message in Tucson, and hands that used to shake but did not anymore. I feel like I learned something, he said finally. What did you learn? That patience is not the same as weakness. That thinking is not the same as cowardice. That doing the right thing is harder than doing the fast thing. Marsh was quiet then. Crawford said you'd figure it out eventually. He's a good teacher. He's an arrogant pain in the ass. That too. Marsh laughed. It was the first time Dalton had heard her laugh in 14 months. Get some sleep, Marcus. Tomorrow the media will want interviews. The director will want briefings. Congress will want testimony. But tonight, you earned rest. What about you? I'll sleep when I'm dead. She hung up. Dalton sat in his office looking at photos of Carlos and Miguel Vega in federal custody, looking at Rafael Vega's body photographed at the extraction site, looking at three faces that had haunted him for over a year. Crawford appeared in the doorway. You staying all night again? The old man asked. No, Dalton said. I'm going home. Good. Dalton stood, grabbed his jacket, walked to the door where Crawford waited. Thank you, Dalton said. Crawford shrugged. I didn't do anything you wouldn't have done eventually. You taught me to wait. I taught you to think. The waiting was just a side effect. They walked to the parking lot together. The night air was cool and clear, stars visible despite the city lights. Somewhere in that vast darkness were families who would wake up tomorrow to news that the men who killed their loved ones were in custody. Somewhere were agents who had risked everything and survived. Somewhere was justice, slow and patient and inevitable. What now? Dalton asked. Crawford smiled. Now you teach someone else. Pass it forward. Make sure the next generation doesn't have to learn the hard way like we did. And you? I'm going back to Montana, back to my ranch, back to peace and quiet and nobody asking me to save the world. Will you come back if we need you? Crawford thought about that. Ask me when the time comes, but I think you don't need me anymore. I think you figured out the secret. What secret? That the hunt never ends. There's always another target, another network, another ghost. The question is whether you chase them with wisdom or with anger. You chose wisdom. That's all anyone can do. He walked to his truck, climbed in, started the engine. Through the open window, he called back. One more thing, Marcus. That guilt you carry from Juarez, it doesn't go away, but it gets quieter. And someday you'll wake up and realize it's not the first thing you think about anymore. That's when you know you've healed. He drove away, taillights disappearing into the darkness. Dalton stood alone in the parking lot for a moment. Then he got in his SUV and drove home to an empty apartment where he slept for 10 hours straight and did not dream at all. The interrogation room smelled like sweat and fear and the chemical tang of disinfectant that never quite covered the other smells. Dalton sat across from Carlos Vega at 0900 the morning after the raids, watching a man who had killed thousands try to look like a victim. Carlos wore an orange jumpsuit that made his skin look sallow. His wrists were cuffed to a steel ring bolted into the table. His eyes, which had looked hard in the driver's license photo, now looked hollow, defeated, like he had known this day would come and had spent years pretending it would not. I want my lawyer, Carlos said for the third time in 10 minutes. You'll get one, Dalton replied. But first I want to understand something. I'm not saying anything without my lawyer. I'm not asking you to confess. I'm asking you to help me understand why. Carlos laughed. It was an ugly sound. Why what? Why I sold drugs? Why I killed people? Because it paid better than washing cars. Because in Mexico, men like me have two choices. Work for the cartel or die. I chose to work. Your brother Miguel said the same thing. Then you understand. Dalton leaned forward. No, I don't understand. Because you didn't just work for the cartel. You ran it. You made decisions that killed 70,000 Americans last year. You could have walked away. You could have said no, but you didn't. So I'm asking why. Carlos was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked up, met Dalton's eyes, and for just a second the mask dropped. Behind the hardness and the fear was something else, something that might have been regret. You want to know why? Carlos asked. Because nobody ever asked me not to. Because by the time I understood what I was doing, I was in too deep to stop. Because saying no would have meant my family died. So I said yes. And I kept saying yes, and here I am. Where is here? Federal prison for the rest of my life, never seeing my children grow up, never holding my wife again, dying alone in a cell because I made choices I can't unmake. Dalton stood, walked to the window. Outside, the desert stretched away toward mountains that looked blue in the morning light. Somewhere out there were families who would never get their children back. Somewhere were graves that should not exist. Somewhere was justice. Cold and final and insufficient. You're right, Dalton said without turning around. You'll die in prison, but before you do, you're going to help me make sure nobody fills the vacuum you left behind. You're going to give me every name, every account, every safe house, every connection you have. Not because it will get you a lighter sentence, it won't, but because maybe, just maybe, it will save one kid from making the same choices you made. He turned to face Carlos. That's the only redemption you're going to get. Take it or leave it. Carlos looked down at his cuffed hands, at the orange jumpsuit, at the future that had collapsed into this moment. I'll take it, he said quietly. The intelligence that came from Carlos and Miguel over the following week was staggering. 217 names, $47 million in accounts they helped locate and freeze, 16 properties across 3 countries, a complete organizational chart of what had been the most successful drug trafficking network in the American Southwest. But the name that changed everything came on the 4th day of interrogation. Reyes brought the transcript to Dalton at 1700 hours. He was in his office reviewing arrest warrants for the 217 people Carlos had identified. She knocked once and entered without waiting for permission. Her face was pale. "We have a problem," she said. Dalton looked up. "What kind of problem?" "Carlos just told us about his supplier, the person who provided the fentanyl his network distributed, the source of everything." "Who?" Reyes set the transcript on his desk, pointed to a name circled in red ink. Dalton read it, felt cold spreading through his chest. "That's not possible," he said. "Carlos says it is." Miguel confirmed it independently. They didn't know we were asking both of them the same questions. The answers match. Dalton stood, walked to the window, stared at nothing. The name on that transcript was not a cartel member, not a criminal, not anyone who should have been involved in drug trafficking. It was a pharmaceutical executive, American citizen, MBA from Harvard, board member of a Fortune 500 company, pillar of the community, donor to children's hospitals, and according to Carlos and Miguel, the single largest supplier of fentanyl to Mexican cartels. "How?" Dalton asked. Reyes pulled up files on her tablet. Legitimate pharmaceutical production, DEA licensed facilities. Everything legal on paper. But they're manufacturing more than they report, keeping the excess off the books, selling it to cartels at a premium. It's been happening for 3 years. Carlos estimates this one company has supplied over 60% of the fentanyl that entered the U.S. during that time. Dalton thought about 70,000 deaths, about families destroyed, about a system that was supposed to protect people being corrupted from the inside by someone who had taken an oath to do no harm. "We need to brief Marsh," he said. "Already did. She's on a plane from D.C., lands in 2 hours. She said not to move on this until she arrives." "Why?" "Because prosecuting a pharmaceutical executive is different from prosecuting a cartel leader. Because we need the evidence to be perfect. Because one mistake and they walk." Dalton understood. Carlos and Miguel were criminals. The rules of engagement were clear. But a corporate executive had lawyers and political connections and the kind of resources that could bury an investigation before it started. This was not a raid. This was a chess game. And Dalton was still learning how to play. Crawford appeared in the doorway as if summoned by the thought. "Heard you found the source." "How did you know?" "Because I've been hunting drug traffickers for 30 years. And every time you think you've cut off the head, you find out the head was just a symptom. The disease is always deeper, always more connected, always protected by people who look legitimate." "What do we do?" Crawford walked to the desk, looked at the name on the transcript. His face showed no surprise, just grim recognition. "You build a case so tight that it strangles them. You get bank records, shipping manifests, production records, everything. You flip someone inside their organization. You make them understand that cooperation is their only option, and then you squeeze until they give up everyone above them and everyone below them. That takes time. Yes, more patience. Yes." Dalton looked at Reyes. "Start pulling financial records. I want to know every transaction this company made in the last 5 years. I want shipping records cross-referenced with production numbers. I want employee interviews. I want everything." Reyes nodded and left. Dalton turned to Crawford. "This never ends, does it? We take down the Vega brothers and find out they were just middle management. We go after the pharmaceutical company, and we'll probably find out they're supplied by someone even bigger. Where does it stop?" Crawford smiled sadly. "It doesn't stop. That's the point. The hunt never ends. There's always another network, another source, another ghost. The question is whether you keep hunting or whether you give up." "I'm tired of hunting, I know, but you're good at it now, and good hunters are rare. So you keep going until someone else can take over, until you've taught enough people that the work continues without you." "Is that what you did?" "That's what I tried to do. Then they fired me for being too slow. But you're not too slow anymore. You're patient. There's a difference. Marsh arrived at 1900 hours, looking like she had not slept in days. She probably had not. The bags under her eyes were dark enough to be bruises. Her suit was wrinkled. But her voice was steady when she gathered the core team in the secure conference room. Dalton, Morrison, Reyes, Chen, Rodriguez, the people who had lived this case for 14 months. The people who deserved to know where it was going. What we're about to discuss doesn't leave this room, Marsh began. Not until we have warrants. Not until we have a case that can survive the lawyers they'll throw at us. Understood? Everyone nodded. Good. She pulled up a presentation on the monitor. Financial records, shipping manifests, production data. Everything Reyes had compiled in 2 hours. Titan Pharmaceutical produces fentanyl for legitimate medical use. Hospitals, clinics, pain management. DEA monitors their production closely. Or we thought we did. But according to Carlos and Miguel Vega, Titan has been manufacturing approximately 40% more fentanyl than they report to regulators. That excess production goes directly to cartels. Has been for 3 years. Chen leaned forward. How much are we talking about? 300 kilograms annually. Street value approximately $600 million. Silence. Morrison spoke. That's enough to kill every person in Arizona twice over. Yes, Marsh said. And it's been happening under our noses because we trusted that a licensed pharmaceutical company would follow the rules. Who knows about this? Dalton asked. At Titan, we're not sure yet. Could be one person, could be the entire executive team. We need to find out before we move. And if we move too soon, they destroy evidence, they scatter, they lawyer up, and we get nothing. We need this to be perfect. Dalton thought about Carlos sitting in an interrogation room talking about choices he could not unmake. Thought about 70,000 dead. Thought about a system that was supposed to protect people being corrupted by the very institutions trusted to heal. How long to build the case, he asked. Marsh looked at Crawford. Crawford looked at Dalton. And in that exchange was everything they had learned over the past 2 weeks. Patience, understanding, the willingness to think instead of act. 30 days, Crawford said. Maybe 60. Depends on what we find and how fast we can flip someone inside. People will die while we wait, Morrison said. It was not a challenge, just a fact. People are dying now, Crawford replied. Question is whether we stop one supplier or whether we dismantle the whole supply chain. Dalton stood, walked to the window, looked out at the city lights spreading across the desert like a constellation fallen to earth. Somewhere out there were people using fentanyl tonight who did not know they were gambling with death. Somewhere were families who would wake up tomorrow to find someone gone. Somewhere was the cost of patience measured in lives. But somewhere too was the cost of impatience, the cost of kicking the wrong door, the cost of moving too fast and losing everything. We do it right, Dalton said. However long it takes, we build the case, we flip someone inside, we make it perfect. Because if we don't, this happens again in 5 years with a different company and a different cartel and 70,000 more deaths. He turned to face the room. Crawford taught me something over the past 2 weeks. He taught me that speed without understanding is just violence. That action without thought is just noise. That the only way to win is to be smarter than the enemy. So we're going to be smarter. We're going to think. We're going to wait. And we're going to end this the right way. Marsh smiled. It was a tired and genuine. Good answer. The investigation into Titan Pharmaceutical took 43 days. Dalton spent those days learning a different kind of patience. Not the patience of surveillance and waiting for targets to appear. The patience of financial analysis and legal strategy. The patience of building a case one document at a time. Reyes led the financial investigation. She traced wire transfers through shell companies in Panama and the Cayman Islands. She matched production records against shipping manifests and found discrepancies that had been hidden in plain sight for 3 years. She built spreadsheets that showed exactly how much fentanyl was being manufactured, how much was being reported, and where the difference went. Chen led the interview team. They talked to Titan employees, low-level workers in the production facility who noticed irregularities but had been told not to ask questions, shipping clerks who saw pallets disappear from inventory without documentation, accountants who were instructed to use certain codes that kept transactions off the audited books. One by one, the pieces came together. On day 30, they identified the person who had orchestrated it, Dr. Sarah Richmond, Chief Operating Officer. 15 years with the company. Medical degree from Johns Hopkins. Previous work with Doctors Without Borders. On paper, a humanitarian. In reality, someone who had decided that the profit from illegal sales outweighed the moral cost of 60,000 deaths. On day 35, they approached her lawyer with an offer. Cooperation in exchange for a reduced sentence. The lawyer laughed and said his client had done nothing wrong. On day 38, they executed search warrants at Titan's corporate headquarters, 3 production facilities, and Dr. Richmond's home simultaneously. They seized computers, documents, financial records, everything. On day 40, Dr. Richmond's lawyer called back. His client wanted to talk. On day 43, she confessed. Dalton watched the interrogation from behind one-way glass. Marsh sat beside him. Crawford stood at the back of the room, silent as always. Dr. Richmond was 52 years old, gray hair pulled back in a bun, reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She looked like someone's kind grandmother. She had authorized the deaths of more Americans than any terrorist in history. I didn't think of it as killing people, she said. Her voice was soft, educated, the kind of voice that explained complex medical procedures to worried patients. The FBI agent across from her said nothing, just waited. I thought of it as a business decision, Dr. Richmond continued. The company was struggling. We had debts. Shareholders were unhappy. The cartel approached us with an offer. They would pay premium prices for product we were already manufacturing. All we had to do was make a little extra and not report it. A little extra, the agent said, 300 kilograms a year. Yes, which killed approximately 60,000 people. Dr. Richmond looked down. I didn't know that number. I didn't ask. I didn't want to know. But you suspected. Yes, and you did it anyway. Yes? Why? She was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. Because I told myself it wasn't my fault, that people who used drugs made their own choices, that I was just a supplier, that the real criminals were the cartels and the dealers and the users themselves. I told myself that story for 3 years, and I believed it because I needed to believe it, because if I didn't believe it, I would have had to look at what I was doing. And I wasn't strong enough to do that. Dalton felt something twist in his chest. Not sympathy exactly, not forgiveness, but recognition. The understanding that evil was not always deliberate. Sometimes it was just weakness, just the slow accumulation of small compromises that added up to something monstrous. He thought about Juarez, about the wrong door, about telling himself that he was just following orders, that the intelligence was good, that someone else was responsible, about the stories people told themselves to avoid looking at what they had become. Marsh spoke quietly beside him. She'll get 25 years minimum, die in prison. Everything she built, everything she was, gone. Good, Dalton said. You don't sound happy about it. I'm not. I'm just tired. Tired of finding out that the enemy is always bigger than I thought, always more connected, always protected by people who should know better. Crawford stepped forward, stood between them, looked through the glass at Dr. Richmond, sitting in her designer suit and her reading glasses, looking small and defeated and guilty. That's the real lesson, Crawford said. Not that evil exists, we knew that. The lesson is that evil is banal, ordinary, committed by ordinary people who convince themselves they're just doing business, just following orders, just making practical decisions. He turned to look at Dalton. You asked me once what the difference was between a soldier and a hunter. I said soldiers follow orders and hunters follow prey. But there's more to it than that. Soldiers kill the enemy. Hunters understand why the enemy exists. And that understanding is what lets you stop the next enemy before they start. How do you stop someone like her? Dalton gestured at Dr. Richmond. She had everything, education, money, respect, and she threw it away for profit. You stop her by making the cost of corruption higher than the profit. You stop her by prosecuting so thoroughly that the next person who thinks about doing what she did remembers what happened to her. You stop her by refusing to accept that this is just how business works. Marsh stood. The Justice Department is filing charges tomorrow. RICO, conspiracy, manslaughter. Everything we can make stick. The company will be fined, probably bankrupted. The executives will go to prison. And maybe, just maybe, the next pharmaceutical company will think twice before they decide that profit matters more than lives. And if they don't, Dalton asked, then we hunt them too. That's the job. That's what we signed up for. We hunt until there's nobody left to hunt or until someone else takes over. There's no finish line, just the work. Dalton absorbed that, the endless nature of it, the Sisyphean task of pushing the boulder up the mountain, knowing it would roll back down. The choice between giving up or keeping going, even when the going felt futile. He thought about Carlos in an interrogation room, saying nobody ever asked him not to. About Dr. Richmond saying she told herself stories to avoid the truth. About himself standing in the parking lot with bleeding knuckles and shaking hands, telling himself that speed would somehow fix what patience could heal. "I think I finally understand," he said. "Understand what?" Marsh asked. "Why you brought Crawford in, not just to teach me tactics, to teach me how to think about the work, how to see the whole system instead of just the targets, how to be patient enough to get it right." Crawford nodded. "Took you long enough. I'm a slow learner." "No, you're a thorough learner. There's a difference." Marsh's phone buzzed. She checked it. Her expression changed. "That's Pentagon. Agent Fernando Martinez has been debriefed and medically cleared. They're recommending him for a commendation. 10 months deep cover, escaped captivity, infiltrated back into the network, and guided the extraction team to his partner. Extraordinary service." Dalton felt something warm spread through his chest. Where is he now? Medical leave for 3 months, then reassignment to whatever posting he wants. He's earned it. Marsh looked at Dalton. "You should reach out to him. He worked the Phoenix cell you were investigating. He'd probably appreciate knowing the Vega network is gone." "I'll do that," Dalton said. Crawford spoke. "That's the other part of the job nobody talks about. The ones who survive. The ones who go deep and come back. They need to know it mattered. That the sacrifice meant something. Don't forget to tell them." 3 weeks later, Dalton stood in front of 40 DEA agents in a training room at the El Paso field office. New recruits, fresh from the academy, eager to kick doors and catch bad guys and make the world safe. The same way he had been eager 14 months ago. Marsh had asked him to give the lecture on intelligence-led operations. Had said he was the best person to teach it because he had learned it the hard way. Had said the next generation needed to hear from someone who had made the mistakes so they would not have to. So here he stood, looking at 40 faces that reminded him of his own face in the mirror before Juarez. Before the failures, before the lessons that came with blood and patience and understanding. "You're going to want to move fast," he began. "Everything in your training tells you that speed matters, that aggression wins, that hesitation gets people killed. And in a gunfight, that's true. But investigations are not gunfights. Investigations are chess games. And if you move too fast, you lose." He pulled up a map of the Vega network. 3 circles representing 3 brothers. Lines connecting them to suppliers and distributors, and hundreds of nodes that had taken 14 months to identify. This is what patience looks like. 3 brothers running a cartel that killed 70,000 Americans. We could have arrested them on day 1 if we had wanted to. We had probable cause. We had evidence. But we would have missed the network. We would have missed the pharmaceutical company supplying them. We would have missed 217 other targets. And in 6 months, someone else would have filled the vacuum and we would be starting over. He clicked to the next slide. Photos of simultaneous raids. Carlos in handcuffs. Miguel surrendering. Dr. Richmond confessing. This is what patience accomplishes, not just arrests, dismantlement, not just stopping one threat, preventing the next threat from emerging. That's the difference between doing something and doing the right thing. A young agent raised her hand. "Sir, what if people die while you're being patient? What if waiting costs lives?" Good question. The same question Morrison had asked. The same question Dalton had asked himself every day for 2 weeks while he waited for Marsh's extraction team to save the hostages. "People die either way," Dalton said. "They die while you wait, and they die while you rush. The question is whether their deaths mean something, whether they lead to an ending or just to a pause before the killing starts again." He thought about how to explain this, how to make them understand without making them cynical, how to teach patience without teaching paralysis. "I'm going to tell you about a raid I led 4 years ago," he said. "Wrong house, wrong intelligence. 3 civilians dead. I was following orders. I was doing what I was trained to do. I was moving fast because speed was what mattered. And innocent people died because I didn't stop to ask if I was certain." The room went quiet. That's what happens when you prioritize speed over understanding. When you act before you think. When you convince yourself that doing something is better than doing the right thing. You make mistakes you can't unmake. You create damage you can't repair. And you carry that weight for the rest of your life. He looked around the room, at young faces that had not yet learned these lessons, at people who would make their own mistakes and carry their own weight, and hopefully, learn faster than he had. So I'm telling you now, be patient, be thorough, be certain. And when you're ready to move, move with everything you have. Because the moment to strike is precious, and you only get one chance to get it right. He dismissed the class. They filed out quietly, thinking, processing, maybe understanding or maybe not. He would not know until they made their own choices and lived with their own consequences. Reyes approached him after the room emptied. That was good, better than the textbook version. The textbook version doesn't talk about killing civilians. No, but the real version does. That's why it matters. She handed him a folder. This came in this morning. Thought you'd want to see it. Dalton opened it. Intelligence summary. New cartel forming in Sinaloa. Remnants of the Vega organization combining with other groups. Calling themselves Los Pacientes, the patient ones. They learn from our tactics, Reyes said. Slow operations, network protection, avoiding patterns. They're using our own methods against us. Dalton smiled. It was not a happy smile. Of course they are. We taught them how to think. Now they're thinking. What do? We think faster. We adapt. We become what they don't expect. Which is patient hunters who know when to strike. We watch them. We learn their new patterns. And when they think they're safe because they're being careful, we show them that careful isn't the same as invisible. Reyes smiled back. Want me to start building the case? Yes, but take your time. Do it right. I'd rather wait 6 months and dismantle them completely than rush in now and scatter them. Copy that. She left. Dalton stood alone in the empty training room, holding a folder that represented the next hunt, the next network, the next test of everything he had learned. Crawford appeared in the doorway. Dalton was not surprised. The old man had a way of showing up exactly when needed. You leaving? Dalton asked. Flight to Montana leaves in 3 hours. Coming back? Probably not. I'm too old for this. Time to let the next generation take over. I'm not ready. Yes, you are. You just don't know it yet. Crawford walked into the room, stood beside Dalton looking at the folder, at the intelligence about Los Pacientes, at the future that kept arriving whether anyone was ready or not. One last lesson, Crawford said, the hardest one. What's that? Knowing when to let go, when to trust that you've done enough, when to accept that the work continues with or without you, and that's okay. I don't know how to do that. Nobody does. You just do it anyway. You wake up one morning and you realize the weight you've been carrying isn't yours to carry anymore. That someone else is strong enough to hold it, and you set it down. Dalton thought about that, about Juarez, about shaking hands and spray-painted walls and 47 failures that led to one success. About learning patience the hard way and teaching it the only way that mattered. I'm not ready to set it down yet, he said. Crawford nodded. Good, but when you are, don't wait too long. Don't become the old man who can't admit he's obsolete. Know when your time is over and step aside with grace. Is that what you're doing? That's what I'm trying to do. Whether I'm succeeding is debatable. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Two hunters who understood each other in the way that only people who had seen the same darkness could understand. Thank you, Dalton said finally, for teaching me, for being patient with me, for not giving up when I was too stubborn to listen. You weren't stubborn, you were learning. There's a difference. What's the difference? Crawford smiled. Stubborn people don't change. Learning people just take time. You took time, but you changed. That's all anyone can ask. He turned to leave, stopped at the door, looked back one more time. The guilt from Juarez, does it still wake you up at night? Dalton thought about that, about the last few weeks, about sleeping through the night without dreams of blood and wrong doors and children's toys in places they should not be. Not as much, he said. Some nights, not all. That's progress. That's healing. Hold on to that. Crawford left. Dalton stood alone with the folder about Los Pacientes and the empty room where he had just taught 40 agents the lessons he wished someone had taught him. He thought about the work that never ended, about patience that saved lives, about understanding that mattered more than speed. And he thought about Crawford's last question, about guilt and healing and the slow process of becoming someone who could sleep without dreaming. He walked to the window, looked out at the desert stretching away toward Mexico. Somewhere out there was a new cartel learning to be patient. Somewhere were people who would die tonight from drugs that should never have been manufactured. Somewhere was the endless cycle of supply and demand and violence that no amount of patience could fully stop. But somewhere too were two DEA agents who had been rescued. Were Carlos and Miguel Vega in federal prison? Was Dr. Richmond awaiting trial? Were 217 arrests that had dismantled a network that killed 70,000 people? Somewhere was progress. Slow, incremental, insufficient, but real. The phone rang. Marsh. Saw your lecture went well, she said. How did you know? I have people who tell me things. Also, I was watching on the security feed. You're a good teacher, Marcus. I'm trying. That's all any of us can do. Listen, I'm calling because I have an opportunity for you. What kind of opportunity? FBI is standing up a new task force, multi-agency, focused on pharmaceutical corruption and cartel supply chains. They want someone to lead it who understands both sides, someone who knows how to build cases that survive lawyers, someone patient enough to do it right. Dalton felt something shift in his chest. You're offering me a promotion. I'm offering you a chance to do what you do best on a bigger stage, to teach what you learn to more people, to make a bigger difference. What about the El Paso office? Morrison can run it. He's ready. You've trained him well. Dalton thought about that, about letting go, about trusting that the work would continue without him, about knowing when to step aside and when to step up. Can I think about it? Take a week. But Marcus, this is the next level. This is where the real work happens. Don't let fear of the unknown keep you from becoming what you're meant to be. She hung up. Dalton stood at the window for a long time after that, watching the sun move across the sky, watching shadows lengthen and light fade and the day turn into evening. He thought about Crawford's words, about knowing when to let go, about stepping aside with grace. But this was not stepping aside, this was stepping forward, into uncertainty, into a bigger mission, into the unknown territory where he would have to learn new lessons and make new mistakes and carry new weight. He thought about the alternative, staying in El Paso, running the same office, fighting the same fights, safe in what he knew, comfortable in patterns that had become familiar. And he knew that safety was a trap, that comfort was the enemy of growth, that the only way forward was into the fear. He pulled out his phone, texted Marsh a single word, yes. Her response came immediately. Welcome to the next level. Report to DC in 2 weeks. Dalton set the phone down, looked around the office that had been his home for 14 months, at the walls covered with maps and photos, at the desk where he had planned 47 failures and 1 success, at the window where he had stood so many nights wondering if he was doing the right thing or just doing something. Morrison appeared in the doorway. Heard you're leaving. How did you hear that? Marsh just told me 5 minutes ago. Morrison smiled. I have people who tell me things. Also, I was standing outside the door when she called. Walls are thin. You listening to my conversations now? Only when they affect my future. You leaving means I'm running this office, right? Right. Good. I was ready 2 months ago, just waiting for you to figure it out. Dalton laughed. First real laugh in a long time. Confident. Learn from the best. You taught me patience. Crawford taught you patience. Now I get to teach the next group. That's how it works. That's how it's supposed to work. Morrison walked in, sat down, looked at Dalton with an expression that mixed respect and friendship and something that might have been pride. You changed, Morrison said, over the past 2 weeks. Became someone different, someone better. I learned. Same thing. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Morrison spoke again. The raid in Juarez 4 years ago, I read the report, wasn't your fault. Bad intelligence, bad orders, bad luck. You did what you were trained to do. I should have questioned it. Maybe, but you were younger, less experienced. You trusted the system. That's not a crime. It cost 3 lives. And carrying that guilt for 4 years hasn't brought them back. At some point, you have to forgive yourself. Not forget, not pretend it didn't happen. Just accept that you're human, and humans make mistakes, and the only thing you can do is try not to make the same mistakes again. Dalton looked at him. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You were just too busy being guilty to notice. They both laughed then, and in that laughter was the release of something heavy. Not the guilt itself, that would probably never fully leave, but the crushing weight of it, the suffocating presence that made every breath feel like failure. Thank you, Dalton said. For what? For being patient with me. For not giving up when I was being an idiot. For being willing to slow me down even when it cost you. That's what partners do. We keep each other alive. We keep each other sane. We keep each other honest. Morrison stood, extended his hand. Dalton shook it. And in that handshake was everything that mattered. Trust, respect, brotherhood forged in the fire of shared purpose. Go teach them how to think, Morrison said. I'll hold down the fort here. Keep hunting, always. 2 weeks later, Dalton stood in a conference room in Washington, D.C., looking at a map that showed pharmaceutical supply chains across 6 continents. Marsh stood beside him. The FBI deputy director stood on the other side. Between them were 15 agents who would form the core of the new task force. This is bigger than cartels, Marsh said. This is about the infrastructure that enables them. The banks that launder money, money, the companies that supply precursors, the corrupt officials who look the other way. We're going to dismantle it piece by piece. How long will it take? One of the agents asked. Marsh looked at Dalton and Dalton looked at the map, at the vast network of connections that spread like spider webs across every country where drugs were manufactured or transported or sold. As long as it takes, he said, we're not sprinting, we're hunting, and good hunts require patience. The briefing continued for 2 hours. At the end, when everyone else had left, Marsh and Dalton stood alone in the empty conference room. Think you made the right choice? She asked. Ask me in a year. Fair enough. She pulled out a folder, handed it to him. This is your first target, pharmaceutical company in China, supplying precursor chemicals to 6 different cartels. They think they're untouchable because they're overseas. Show them they're wrong. Dalton opened the folder, saw the familiar pattern, production records, financial trails, the same kind of case he had built against Dr. Richmond, the same kind of hunt, just bigger, more complex, more important. How much time do I have? He asked. However long it takes to do it right. We're done rushing. We're done making noise. From now on, we think, we plan, we execute perfectly. The era of kicking doors and hoping for the best is over. Good, Marsh smiled. Crawford would be proud. Have you talked to him? Called him yesterday. He's doing well. Says Montana is quiet. Says he sleeps through the night now. Says he doesn't miss the work at all. Do you believe him? Not for a second, but I believe he's earned the right to lie about it. They stood at the window looking out at the Capitol, at the monuments and museums and government buildings that represented the system they had sworn to protect. The system that was flawed and corrupt and imperfect, but still worth fighting for. You know this never ends, right? Marsh said quietly. We can take down 1,000 pharmaceutical companies, and there will always be 1,000 more. We can arrest every cartel member in existence, and new ones will form tomorrow. The work is infinite. I know. And you're still willing to do it? Dalton thought about that, about the weight of infinite work, about Sisyphus and his boulder, about Crawford's words about knowing when to let go. But he also thought about 2 DEA agents rescued from torture, about 70,000 deaths that would not be repeated next year because the Vega network was gone, about 40 agents in El Paso who learned that patience saves lives. Yes, he said, because infinite work means infinite opportunities to get it right, infinite chances to learn, infinite moments where one person doing the right thing makes a difference. Marsh nodded. That's the answer I was hoping for. She left. Dalton stood alone with a folder about a pharmaceutical company in China and a window that looked out on the future. He thought about Crawford in Montana, about Morrison in El Paso, about Reyes building cases against Los Pacientes, about all the people he had learned from and all the people he would teach. He thought about Juarez, about wrong doors and shaking hands and guilt that would never fully disappear but had become quieter, manageable, something he carried instead of something that carried him. And he thought about patience, about learning to think before acting, about understanding that speed without wisdom was just violence, about becoming a hunter instead of a soldier. His phone buzzed. Text from Crawford. Heard you took the job. Proud of you. Remember what I taught you. Watch, learn, think, then strike. The patient hunter always gets his prey. Dalton smiled. Typed back. Thank you for everything. I'll make you proud. The response came immediately. You already have. Dalton set the phone down, picked up the folder, opened it to the first page and began to read. There was work to do, a company to investigate, a network to dismantle, a hunt to begin. But this time he was ready. This time he understood. This time he would move with patience and precision and the quiet certainty that came from lessons learned the hard way. The hunt never ended, but neither did the learning. And somewhere in the infinite cycle of pursuit and capture, and pursuit again, was meaning. Purpose, the knowledge that doing the right thing mattered more than doing something fast. He began to plan, methodically, carefully, with all the patience he had learned and all the wisdom he had earned. Outside the window, the sun set over Washington. The day ended, the work continued, and Marcus Dalton, patient hunter, student of hard lessons, teacher of harder truths, leaned forward into the future and began to think. The rest would follow, in time, as it always did, when the moment was right, when the understanding was complete, when patience had done its work and wisdom knew the way. The hunt continued, and this time he was ready. This story hit different for me because I've talked to operators who lived through this exact dilemma, the pressure to show results versus doing the job right. Marcus Dalton's transformation from aggressive raider to patient hunter mirrors what a lot of veterans learned the hard way in the field. Here's my question for you. Have you ever been in a situation where slowing down actually saved lives? Where thinking beats shooting? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. And if you appreciated how this story honored the real work over Hollywood heroics, there are more like it coming. Hit subscribe so you don't miss them. The next hunt begins soon. What did Crawford's lesson mean to you? Let's talk about it.